coming up. My daughter, and please come up, my daughter, when she was in her teenage years, we were setting up her kitchen table, which is going to be our theme for today. Setting up her kitchen table, and she was talking to me. And those of you that have grown daughters that went through teenage years remember that this is the period of time where when you talk with them, you don't know whether they're going to cry, scream at you, hug you, or start laughing. And she was incessantly talking and obviously knew that I was kind of paying attention to her. And as she got into the conversation, she slammed her fist on the table and she said, "Dad, this is different. This is important." And I guess I wanted start off our panel today with that thought that, I think this is really different and I think this is really important. And we want to do our panel a little bit different today than maybe some other panels. We've supplied you with kitchen tables. We've supplied you with napkins to write on. We've supplied you with kind of a two-pager that has some questions. And we want to tee it up. We have some amazing people in this room today to take this conversation further. And 5 of them are setting up here, and the rest of them are setting out there. So we're going to tee up a conversation with our panel, and then we very quickly want to get your reaction. So as we're talking, the questions that I would pose that I think that would be helpful to talk about: can we make sense out of this stuff? Can we see North Ridgeville, Ohio in the data and the implications? And secondly, what does this stuff mean? What do we need to be doing about it? Because I would contend we're already doing a lot, but we need to maybe do some stuff differently. And thirdly, and most importantly, what do we do when we walk out of the door today different? How do we begin putting this stuff together and turning this from great research, from a great study, into some action? With us today, as I said, we've got some 5 brave souls. Ziona Ostra, I don't know whether you noticed, but her name tag was kind of flat. Ziona's with Cleveland State University, has been involved in virtually every piece of research that the the fund has been doing since the beginning, and her nameplate is so well used that I think it just kind of flattened out and doesn't set up anymore. But fantastic research that really has a pulse on Northeast Ohio. Greg is with Policy Bridge, and he and I share something. And your company was Brown and Associates. I had a consulting firm before I came to the Community Foundation, and I think we got real jobs after doing consulting for a while. At least that was my excuse. Terry Burgess Sandu is with Lorain County Community College, and her job titles, I think, embody part of the conversation, because she's the head of the Entrepreneurial Innovation Institute, but also in charge of workforce development for the college and bridging those two pieces. Grace Gallucci is our, can I still say new, executive director of NOACA? Yeah, has been with him for a while, doing a great job. And in her other day job, she is the chair of Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium, and doing a great job with that. And Beju has been instrumental in Northeast Ohio, is with Biomotive now, but previously with BioEnterprise. So let's kick off the conversation. I want to start it out by just asking you, and Ziona, if you want to start, what was your reaction when you first saw this research? Huh?
She saw it before anything.
Well, okay, and so in your case, as it was unfolding, what was your reaction? How did you see it applying to what you had done in the past and what you're thinking about now?
So some of the findings we kind of expected, and some were a surprise to us. And I want to build on what Emily said before, and I think it will respond to some questions that we had earlier. When you look at factor 1, it was the most important factor, and it really dealt with talent, education, and innovation. And the type of variables that were there, really, if you look at them, they described 3 phenomena of 3 different characteristics of metro areas. We have educational attainment there, we have high skill occupation, and we have several variables that describing innovation. And then when we scored everything, we said, wow, Cleveland metro area really is ranked number 59. Out of 115, it's in the middle. When we started this research 6, 7, 8 years ago, we were dying to be in the middle as a region. Because a lot of the ranking, and Mark, you remember that, and Brad, we were in the 4th quartile, the 3rd quartile. And people from the fund said, we want to be in the first quartile. And Brad, remember, I said, we'll be happy to be in the middle. Let's not jump all the way there. So when I looked at that, I go, wow, you know, we achieved something after being here. And I would say a lot of the investment from the fund, from other foundations in innovation and entrepreneurship, may be beginning to shed our reputation as an old industrial place. So I think that's wasn't surprising, but I think it's interesting to see. Also, within Factor 1, if we look at the three themes, where we are ranked the highest is in innovation. And somebody asked before about innovation. There are several variables. There's the industry university R&D, the small business innovation research grants. There is a tech transfer, venture capital, patents, and all of that, Cleveland is really ranked within the top half. Some of them we are ranked as high as 16, 7, depending on the variables. If you want, we can give you the details later. But I think we should be proud that in the innovation side, we, as a metro area, we rank pretty well. Where we're ranking not as well is in the educational attainment. And that's where we need, as a region, as a metro area, to put more of our work in, is really to improve our educational attainment in bachelor degrees and in associate degrees, and where all the STEM conversation has to be taking place with that. The other, do I have another minute?
Sure.
The other thing, and I think that Emily talked about, was really the variable on the factor on polarization. And when we first saw the relationship between polarization and employment growth, we go, whoa. And we had many, many hours of additional research, many hours of meetings with the Federal Reserve Bank, with the fund, with other economists from the Council of Economic Advisors. And I think it's a symbol of our labor force, that it's really now split. We have a labor force that is a high-tech, high-wage, high-skill labor force versus the low-wage, low-skill, low-wage labor force. And it's a problem, and that's what causes the polarization.
Thank you. So part of it was a reaffirmation, part of it was, and I'm a recovering program evaluator in former life. To hear a researcher and economist go, whoa, is pretty significant. So, Greg, you do a lot of work with inclusion and looking at policies and how that impacts our population. What was your reaction to this?
Well, I think first of all, as in any research that occurs, there are some things that you kind of have a sense that you would see that naturally kind of evolve out of the research. As Ziona said, I think many of us were really struck by the vast difference in terms of job creation and how that really didn't lead to income generation. And what that meant in terms of implications for not only a split labor force in terms of high skill, high competency, and high capability versus low skill, but also how are we going about creating jobs? Who's creating a job? Where are the jobs being created? And what kind of workforce do we need for that? Currently, we have a lot of jobs that are going, that are vacant today because we don't have people who are capable of filling those jobs. So from an inclusion standpoint, we think about it in a couple of ways, because what we know is that there is a very good infrastructure that has been created over the last few years. We also realize that there is a lot of work being done to try to align the infrastructure with heretofore unusual suspects, healthcare, education, social services. That's new work, that's beginning work. It's not as well developed, and it needs to be better conceived. But last but not least, what we really know is that inclusion needs to be embedded in the bowels of the organization and the region as not an alternative strategy or another strategy, but the strategy when we're thinking about the things that we need to do to enhance and develop our economy for its vitality and long-term survivability. So from my perspective, I think that was kind of the message that I took away from this, thinking about how do we work with organizations from a policy bridge perspective to help them understand the data better, and then to help them think about how they then use this data to operate differently, but not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, we're not saying, eschew the system now and get rid of it and do something different. We're saying, okay, now let's think about how we embed this work in your work so that it's really connected and fused together, as opposed to being set aside distinctively as a way of kind of doing that. And then on top of that, and last but not least, we think the only thing that count are those things that you can measure. And those things that you measure are important because they become priorities. So, we believe that there have to be metrics that not only talk about what it means, but people then are held accountable and use those metrics as a way of talking about the work itself.
Our community college set out 25 years ago or so to really recognize that we couldn't just be about providing talent. We had to be about helping to create the jobs. And still, as I'm starting to travel nationally, there's a lot, I think people tend to be surprised that we are so deeply involved in economic development. So that mix of entrepreneurship, innovation, and talent, and how that has to happen side by side is sort of embedded in how we operate and how we work with the county and the region. But it was very, very interesting to see the data start to bear that out. Personally, I was also very happy to see the word self-employment. I now have the Small Business Development Center under our umbrella, and I think I had this conversation the other day. I think we tend to think of those, those are the Main Street organizations, but if you read about how many of those entrepreneurs and those people who went on to launch huge businesses grew up next to mom and dad, or someone in their family working in the family store, or in a restaurant, they're learning that entrepreneurial mindset from a very young age. So I think, again, those businesses, not just as businesses, but as places that are teaching people who can be our future drivers of those kind of enterprises. So those are a couple of things. I think some of the conversations happening out at our college, and I think with many of our Innovation Fund partners, are, there's been some really great work on the startup side of the equation, and a lot of resources built to support startups and get them through that cycle of growth. And a really dynamic conversation happening now around those small to mid-sized companies, maybe in the 50 to 200 or 300 employees, that have strong growth opportunities, but are very tactically focused right now just to survive. And how do we now apply those, the same infrastructure or new infrastructure to help those companies lift their head and have that strategic focus? I know programs like Entrepreneur's Edge and PRISM are focused on that. Innovation Fund is looking at maybe having a seed level funding, maybe a whole new capital opportunity for those types of companies. So it's just interesting. I think all of this data supports that work. I would say, and I think hopefully part of the conversation, and maybe one of my questions for Emily later, is on the inclusion front. And many of you who've heard me speak before will understand this. I would really encourage us to widen our lens of what we mean by inclusion. And are we looking at the data around gender? Are we disaggregating data around? So we're looking at race, gender, immigrant status, age, veteran, and it becomes a much more complex set of data. But without that data, we could be missing key indicators that impact how much of our population are getting STEM degrees. How many of those folks are getting STEM degrees and able to work in a STEM field? We know from the commercialization task force that the Board of Regents did that we have many more people earning STEM degrees than are getting STEM jobs. So, there's a complexity there around our talent that needs to be dove into.
Grace, you can talk from NOACA's side, you can talk from the OSIC side, but what do you see as the implications for the work that you're doing?
Well, as I think about the information that has been provided, and you look at the data points, and what does that mean? I look at it through the lens of how do we use this to inform our collective decision making. It's a new set of information that in some ways surprises us because of the correlations, but in some ways doesn't surprise us at all because of the correlations. And we really, each one of us, not up here, all of us need to think about what does this mean for how we do business differently within our organizations. And, I was thinking about this last night. What would I try to say today that would be meaningful, that somebody could take away with? And you talked about your daughter pounding her fist on the table. I was thinking, we've all been so polite, and we've always, or I shouldn't say always, but we've been saying, let's agree to disagree. Let's not. Let's agree to agree. We have a situation that was identified. We're working towards solving it. It's getting better. Let's agree that this is a very important point, a turning point. And how do we, each one of us in our personal and professional lives, make choices that change that trajectory? How do we do that? And this is tremendous data that helps us to make those connections. And specifically as it relates to NOACA, transportation and the economy are clearly linked. And I say that because transportation policy has its roots back in the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. That link has been around for a long time. Back when people, particularly farmers, small businesses, determined that inequities existed because the railroad companies had the power to decide how the transportation system would work. Do we see that again today in a different way? Do we see it in the road networks we're building, into, where are we taking people, and where are we taking jobs to the people, to the jobs? How are we connecting those? And worse yet, how have the policy decisions of the past disconnected and disproportionately impacted people relative to jobs and the economy?
Fantastic. And I guess I would add to what you said, Grace, is not only is this new data, but I would contend that we're also in a period where we're inventing new ways of solving problems and making decisions. So you both got the content and the infrastructure for what we do with this in kind of turmoil, which is a tremendous opportunity, because I think in Northeast Ohio, we're ahead of the game. We've been working at that very diligently for the past 10 years, and we've got some structures in place that are making it happen. Beju, sorry you're sitting at the end of the table. You've played a huge role in Northeast Ohio in the nonprofit side, working with for-profit, and now you've kind of changed hats a bit, although I would guess that your hat is kind of shifting at times. But how does this impact what you're doing and thinking about and envisioning for the future?
I guess just a couple of reactions. First, it was nice to see that entrepreneurship actually has a positive correlation to something important in the region. The last decade. No, but what surprised me, it's not so much the data, but what struck me as I was just listening to the presentation is Bob started us off with a question. It was really a question of how many of us were, I think you said, lifelong Clevelanders or Cuyahoga County residents. And it was a little bit depressing how many hands went up. Because I think about that, and I think about that in its stark contrast to the three regions that Emily featured as her poster child regions. If you think about Raleigh-Durham, or if you think about Austin, Texas, or Denver, Colorado, you would never have a room full of people have 3/4 of their hands go up saying they've been lifelong residents of those geographies. So now bringing that back to the data and sort of the areas that I see here in the bold headlines, the criticality of education and innovation. The discussion that we often have in the region is how do we help the people that are already here, whether it's through community college programs or workforce development programs or K-16 institutions. And I keep thinking about those geographies that we're looking to be more like because of the positive economic growth, the positive inclusion and income distribution. And it's about the transplants that have decided to locate into those regions, whether they went there originally to join one of those institutions or more often they went there for a job. And so I look at this research and think about what can we be doing. If I relate it back to BioEnterprise, my last decade, when we thought about the challenge of attracting capital to companies in the region, we didn't look around the region for the capital. That would have been ridiculously constraining to the growth of our companies because there just simply isn't enough of that type of capital in this geography or really in almost any geography to grow the types of businesses that one wants to grow in our sector. And I think about the same thing in terms of talent, that if we want to grow the region's economy and if we think that education has a very positive correlation to all of the factors that we want to drive, how do we grow the region's educational attainment? By bringing individuals to the region that have already had the types of skills or the types of training or the types of degrees that are relevant to the economy that is now starting to take root here.
Great. Good ideas. Some good thoughts. Take out your napkins. And what I want to do is I really want to get this to be a dialogue. I would like my job to be done right now and just kind of be a traffic cop. But I'd really like to hear from you. How does this impact what you're doing? What are your thoughts about it? And let's have a conversation back and forth with you guys in the audience. Yeah. And if you could speak up, the acoustics are pretty good, but I know they're trying to catch it on the. Pardon?
Identify who you are.
Yeah, please.
So I'm Chester Bowling. I'm with OSU Extension Community Development. I'm sure that I'm not the only one who actually wasn't surprised by that finding about the polarization. And for me, the thing that I've been seeing, of course, is across the state, because of computerization and automation in every manufacturing facility or any kind of facility that has human beings in it, there has been already that polarization. All the mid-wage jobs have gone away, and there's a plant that makes paper cups in, I've forgotten what county this is in, but Kenton, it's in Kenton, Ohio, and they used to have a dozen employees. Now they have a dozen automated computer machines and one employee. And so all the jobs that are being created now are either at one end of the spectrum or the other. And the high quality jobs, there are less and less of those, and there are more and more of the low end jobs that are being created. So to me, it just sort of follows what's happening in the overall workforce. And what I'm wondering about actually and thinking about is that, Emily, I wonder if the slide of the Evergreen cooperatives might not be in the wrong place in your presentation, that's where it might actually belong, is in that polarization, because I think that the notion of cooperatives and employee-owned enterprises like Evergreen are actually the solution to what we're talking about, because I don't think we're actually going to get to the place where we can create enough of those high-quality jobs to reduce that polarization. The only way to actually convert the system is to begin to make more employee-owned enterprises through cooperatives and that sort of thing. So that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Great. Amy?
Hi, Amy Morgenstern, and notwithstanding Brian's comments, I'm a consultant, and I do consider that I have a real job.
Sorry, Amy.
That's all right. It's not the first time I've heard of this. I work with the philanthropic, nonprofit community, and in response to how is this data, these findings, beneficial on so many fronts. We've had a dearth of fact-based information, and to have this body of information and data and go into it with clients and pull from the data space information that matters to inform decisions, first is tremendous. So thank you all very much. And the second point, and it's made, Denise, you started out with your comment, interconnectivity, and in fact, seeing the correlations between so many different factors that many of us think about in boxes. And that's the thought that is also beneficial, that we have to get outside of the particular boxes that we all work in and our mindsets around. So the point of using it is to understand the correlations is very, very helpful.
Great. And we do have a lot of boxes. I had something interesting happen just 2 days ago. One of my foundation colleagues in Lorain County, I was telling her about this meeting today, and she was telling me about how our early education folks have been getting together and the conversations that they're having about how can they help our 3 health departments in Lorraine County look at some kind of meaningful consolidation or collaboration, because there's way too much disconnection in that. And then what kind of implications that has down the road. And so going back to your point, Greg, I think we've got groups getting together working on this stuff. And like Brad Whitehead often says, the difference is there's nobody in charge right now. It's kind of there's an open blank slate to a certain extent that's allowing people and groups come together to have conversations about solving some things that they see in the community. And so this is as much, I think, about alignment as it is about coming up with a strategy that everybody is going to march to. Question, and then I'll come back to you.
Hi, I'm John Coleman with Wirenet in Cleveland, and I guess I had a comment about an earlier comment and a question. One is sort of, I guess, a caution that we try to avoid some of this absolutist tone to our conversation. Cleveland has not lost all of its middle skills by a long shot. We work with manufacturers every day, and we've identified in Cleveland 200 growing manufacturers that have a whole range of jobs. Now, I know that as a proportion of the region's job base has dramatically changed, but I think there's a huge opportunity, like Terry was saying, to work with these firms and help them more quickly, and with fewer mistakes. The other thing I wanted to ask, I guess, is whether, or to what degree some of these kind of standard measures that are being used, like gross regional product, how satisfied are we with that as a measure of what's going on? Because there's a lot of wasted expenditure in that number. Toxic waste cleanup, for example, or brownfield cleanup to some degree, or pollution. Miles traveled to work, a lot of money spent traveling to work, and that's not necessarily a good expenditure. Now, I guess the dashboard to some degree is trying to balance that one measure, but I just was curious to what extent we ought to be thinking about different kinds of measures that beyond just like grocery and regional product. I mean, even the employment number that seems to indicate that this region is recovering faster than the national average. As you said, as the data said, it's misleading because of polarization, job quality, and many other factors.
Great.
But I don't know if
Great.
somebody would like to comment.
Art, do we have the right definition for success?
So again, after many conversations, the group decided to look at 4 different measures of economic growth. No measure is really perfect. If you just talk to economists, they would love to use per capita income. But that has its own, it's an average. You take all of total personal income in a region and divide by the number of people. That has its problems too. So because of that, we added a gross regional product. And what it is really, it's the value of all goods and services that are produced in the region. So when you think about it, it's the equivalent of GDP at the national level, and it's a measure of output. That's what it is. Employment is a problem, part-time, full-time, but it's another measure, it's another angle of how to look at our economy. And the 4th one is productivity, which is really the output per employee. So I think when you take all 4 of them together, it's a pretty good picture of what we can measure about the macroeconomy, each of them with its own problems. If you have another idea of how to measure performance of an economy, we'll be happy to look into it.
Gross regional happiness.
I love it. I love it. And I think that's one of the dangers, because we're locked into data that is readily available and that we can compare ourselves with other regions. But we know that there are other things that are important to us. And so I guess I would push back a little bit, Greg, that I think metrics are critical, but there's those intrinsic things that make Parma, and North Ridgeville, and Chardon, that we aren't going to be able to necessarily see in these data or compare to other regions, but we know they're absolutely critical for the happiness and the well-being of our communities. And so that's where the conversation comes in, to have advocates, I think, to say that, yeah, this stuff is important, this is what we need to focus on. Emily, you wanted?
I just had a brief clarification.
Okay.
Because because I don't think I mentioned this in the presentation, but for the factor economic polarization, we really do sit in the middle as a region. We have a strong history of a middle class, and I think a lot of people are asking the questions, not manufacturing isn't, it's a really complex sector,
Yeah.
right? So you have a lot of different things going on there, and people are looking at, you know, how do we leverage that as an asset and not look at it as, you know, a drag, because there are so many innovative things going on there, and we really are seeing that as a strong asset in the recovery. So I just wanted to note that as far as economic polarization, the region is actually, again, kind of performing right in the middle, but I don't know if the middle is good enough when you look at, you know, inequality and segregation.
We actually, I think, perform better than the middle. We are ranked 67, I believe, in polarization. Cleveland, yeah, 67. And that means that we are low on polarization, which is good, because what really makes up polarization is a lot of poverty variables. So,
Great.
Yeah, what I was going to say, you know, around the metrics issue is I agree with you. I think you can't measure everything. I think, and I think sometimes we get so accustomed to only looking at quantitative measures that we forget that there are qualitative descriptors that help us understand the depth and breadth of what we're trying to add for context. So first of all, you spend more time looking at these measures. Any process says that as you go through the evaluative process, you start to talk about, is this still a good measure? How does it help define us? Is this something that we can continue to use? Are there other things we need to be looking at? But also, are there other people we should be talking to? How do they inform us about this? How do we bring them in so the perspective they provide gives us greater depth and breadth? So for me, all of that is a part of what I'm talking about when I talk about metrics.
Gotcha.
I'm not talking about just quantitative measures, because I think too many times we have quantitative measures and we stop there. I think the other thing that's important, and I think Ziona talked about it, is that as these indicators were factored together, these variables were factored together, they influence each other and they move together. They have some kind of association, positively or negatively. We need to understand that, and what does that mean, and who can help us understand not just what the numbers say, but what is the practical implication for that for individuals and for where they live in their environment. Because that will help us to describe, first of all, what we're trying to do better, and then secondarily, to develop strategies and tactics that impact those people and those places better.
Great. So maybe we'll jointly create a regional happiness indicator that'll be the new metric.
I'll start it.
Brad, and then in the
I
back.
just wanted to respond to these of the metrics as well, because, first of all, I agree with the point that there's a lot of, we don't have enough middle skill jobs being created, but there are middle skill jobs being created. I know in the funds work, we've been associated with, over the last 3 years, about 7,200 jobs through the work of our MPs who work with companies, and that's been at $51,000 a job. So it is possible, but it's part of the effort. But I agree also that we may have half a loaf on some of the metrics, because we focus on growth metrics here. The conversation inside the fund right now is how do we link the growth in the opportunity, and so we've been grappling with what is the opportunity metric that best integrates with the growth metric. The best we've come up with so far is that we're now trying to track labor force participation rates in economically distressed neighborhoods. So do people in the hardest hit neighborhoods, are they joining the labor force? And that feels like an easy one to look at, but it's a really challenging one to affect, because they need to be prepared for the jobs, but then they also need to have access to the jobs. So it's quite so good to have Terry and Grace sitting next to each other, bringing the workforce and a transportation piece here. And more than ever, do we see those things as being linked to the preparation for the access.
Great. Kurt, I'm going to come back to you. We've had a very patient hand in the back of the room. Ma'am.
she can talk louder.
Yeah, could you speak up just a little bit?
I'm sorry, I thought. My name is Debbie Siegel, and I work at the Savings Foundation, and I also have the privilege of chairing the title for guarantee that
the youth in our community, whether it's related to race, but there is the actual conversation, and I would say help us figure out as a region how we look at those underrepresented or subpopulations that are not thriving, and also to figure out solutions so that we can move our region forward. When I look at some of the data and look at Denver as a place where the community is thriving, where they talk to solutions, one of the things that I know that they took a careful look at their K-12 system. And when we talk about matriculation to college and being able to persist in college, one of the basic things that they did was to ensure that what happened at K-12 supported the goals they were looking at for people to be able to go to college and persist in college. So there's lots of strategies that we use. I'm hopeful that as the funding continues to improve, but the data that they will present really means to us as a region, that we'll think about how we can infuse sectors that are not usual suspects at a table when we're looking at the economic vitality of the region. And I offer the Base Matters team and the national resources that we have to help fuel that conversation.
Fantastic, thank you. Kurt, did you want to react, or you're doing a lot of work in P16, so.
Kurt Sharper from the Third Federal Foundation. I just wanted to talk about some statistics that I think we all need to keep in mind. First of all, our literacy rates. The Literacy Cooperative did a study and identified in Cuyahoga County 47% of the adults read at a 7th grade level or less. That's half of our workforce. So that's a staggering figure. And I don't think that's just Cuyahoga County data. That probably extends to the whole region. And so, I mean, all due respect to Beju about bringing talent in, but we also need to have talent that's here educated to the level where they can take the jobs that we need. The other thing is about the transportation. The state of Ohio, I think, invests $1.50 per person in public transportation. Our bordering states invest $25 per person. So policy-wise, we really need to talk to the state legislature about our investing in public transportation. So just those factors have to be kept in mind if that, you know, that red arrow that says we're going to continue to outperform, those factors have to be kept in mind.
Great, great. Back through, yes.
I'm Amy Hanover, Director of Policy Matters. You took the word right out of my mouth, a couple of things. So I run Policy Matters Ohio, which is a local think tank, but I wanted to say that I'm on the board of a national think tank called VIVOS that is doing some work around a genuine progress indicator, which I think is another interesting sort of wrinkle that we get. I think this is a great panel and a great set of work that you've done on it, and I'm really, really happy to see all of the focus on equity and inclusion. And I would love to help think through some of the policy solutions. I think we're having a lot of great discussion about the role that employers can play and the sort of local economic development decisions that we make. But I just have to echo the previous person that if we can have some better policies at the state level, including investment in transit, including adequate state budget, including investment in education, those are going to be some of the things that make a region like Cuyahoga County and surrounding areas able to thrive. So thanks for everything.
Great. Terry?
I wanted to mention a couple of examples of, I think, some really cool things going on in the region, and then touch a little bit on what Beju's point was, which I think is really important. One is the speed to, a couple of really interesting things happening in the region that, you know, maybe we could build on. One is the Speed to Market Accelerator with Nortec, Magnet, Jumpstart, and the college, but 12 county region ties together a lot of our educational institutions, and it's tied to the commercialization process. How do you accelerate it? But it's really part of a national initiative where they've linked economic development funding with talent and workforce funding from the beginning. So while we each have our separate contracts, we have an integrated work plan. So as Nortec is working with companies in advanced energy and flex electronics to think about how do I get this product to market, and these companies are thinking about technology, capital, marketing, we're there saying, well, what about your talent needs? Not just your CEO, not just your engineer. What's going to happen if you actually are successful Nortec and our economic development colleagues are helping us be smart about that conversation, and we're learning so much. So our region is one of a handful of these happening around the country, so pay attention to that. We're learning so much. I think it's really, really exciting. Natoya Walker is here from the city of Cleveland, and she really deserves a lot of credit for driving a major initiative around community benefits agreements in the city of Cleveland based on national models, where this whole conversation around when we're about to invest billions of dollars in infrastructure projects, who benefits? What's the benefit we want? It gets to the question of quality of life, right? Is it just jobs? Is it also parks? So kudos to Natoya, who has, I think, helped lay the groundwork for a level of collaboration and communication that we hadn't seen before, and that'll be really interesting to watch. And then I just want to put in one little plug for social innovation. I think where our young leaders are. When I ran Hard Hat of Women, we had a VISTA program, and we were recruiting people from all over the country, and there was just sort of this cool factor, and there are some really interesting things going on around the world and nationally around social entrepreneurship and tackling social problems with an entrepreneurial mindset. We have some of that going on in Cleveland, but we certainly could do a lot more. And it would be really interesting to talk to our young leaders about, what's keeping them here. I mean, the whole urban agriculture movement is much more than just an economic driver. It is a cool factor, and it is bringing people together from different communities. And frankly, that is what kept some of that talent in our community. We're trying to figure out now how might that impact the city of Elyria or the city of Lorain. How do we draw some of what has worked so well in Cleveland to those communities? So I think our emerging leaders are really key in that conversation to define that, and that might lead to, I think, some of that combination of talent attraction as well as growing our own. So.
Another example of connecting economic growth and opportunities is really the Greater University Circle Initiative, where where it tries to harness the power of the anchors to benefit the adjacent neighborhoods around University Circle. And the city of Cleveland is very involved with it, but you see the anchors, the healthcare systems, and the universities working to change how they really hire people. They're working with towards employment to try and bring people from the neighborhoods to get jobs at University Hospital, at the Cleveland Clinic. It's very difficult for them to access these jobs. So again, we have growing industries, the healthcare industry, the education industry, and how do we really connect it to employment opportunities for low skill and the underemployed.
Kathy?
Well, you all know what I'm going to say if you know me. When we talk about education, I have heard anyone here mention creating a pie. And we have all the data we need to prove that if we make the investment there, we save money along all of these other spectrums. So I just encourage us, as we talk about education, not to forget that means.
So I just added that there's actually some recent research that shows that that level of pre-K education returns a higher level of return on investment than all the business attraction that's done anywhere. So I would go back to apologize to the WireNet folks and to the fund. My comment was not an absolutist comment. What I'm curious about, though, is the loss of those middle jobs, the pace at which, there's an indoor and an outdoor. Are those jobs going out the back door faster than they're coming in the front door? And to recognize the tension between one of the measures, which is productivity. The only way organizations achieve productivity is by the further application of technology. I was just at a fracking site 2 days ago where they drilled the longest well in the world, longest horizontal well in the world in the shortest amount of time. So, the tension between those two things is amazing. And I also want to ask a question about the thing that I was surprised in this research is this disconnect between education and jobs, because it seems to call into question the the conventional wisdom that an educated workforce actually attracts companies. Am I missing something? I don't know where Emily's gone, but. Oh, there you are. So the question is, you know, if education is not connected to jobs,
Yeah.
then all the conversation that we're having here about education, I'm confused. I'm missing the link.
I'm looking at Mark Snyderman if he wants to take this one for me. But, this is a really important point because we don't want people to misinterpret. It's not that there isn't a link. There wasn't a positive or negative correlation. You saw in a lot of those there were kind of blank spaces. So it wasn't statistically significant enough either way. It doesn't mean, and depending on what metro you're looking at, it doesn't mean that education and job growth aren't related and have tremendous connections. Remember that jobs number is good jobs and bad jobs. So you're not, it didn't associate it itself with those higher tech, you know, higher skill level jobs. That's not to say that it's not associated with middle skill level jobs or the metros that are, you know, have that mix that we're looking for. So just to clarify, but it's a great point. There wasn't, depending on what you're looking at, there wasn't any association either way.
I just wanted to make a point that I want to go back to what Grace said about we've got to agree to agree, and I think we also have to realize that we're going to bump heads occasionally when we do that, and that's okay because it's a clarification process. There are things that are important that we need to clarify, but we also can learn from that. So I think this kind of discourse is exactly what we need to be doing, and we need to be doing it constantly and around different tables to get a better idea of what is really important, how do things connect together, because I don't think it's one strategy, it's a line strategy. We've got to figure out what we're doing in Lorain County fits with what's going on in Cleveland, and where we've got synergy and where we've got things that we're doing in Lorain County because Lorain County needs it and maybe Cuyahoga doesn't. So how about one more quick question? Mark, did you want to respond?
I'm Mark Snyder, Federal Research. So it's appropriate for an economist to talk more research. So let me just question about education and jobs, and in so doing, you make an appeal for people spending more time in the database. There are a lot of metros. So what you want to do if you're interested in this issue about education and jobs is look at are there metros in the database that have experienced strong employment growth and say strong per capita income growth at the same time. How many of those 115 metros might fit that profile? And then take a look at those metros and maybe try to figure out what might be going on in those particular places. That's a set of outcomes that are important to you. And then more broadly, keeping in mind that there are a lot of metros and other factors. As Emily mentioned in the completing conversation, but I'm not going to be locked into this. You can go into that database and you can rank metros that are pointing to a number of different factors. So if you have particular places that you're interested in, one that we often spend some time looking at our shop is Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, because they're comparable to us in a lot of ways. We share a lot of history with us in a lot of ways. It's a convenient place for us to look at because we're close by, but they're right across the state boundary. So sometimes there are differences in state laws, things like that, that form a natural experiment, thinking about if you would have a Iowa law like this, is that a factor for the conference difference? So you can actually go to this database and really learn a lot more about it. And then the final comment I want to make is, you mentioned at the beginning that if you look at these three factors, they explain half the variation across the metros. That means half the variation is not being explained by these factors. So one of the things that I think is kind of fascinating to think about, statistically what that means is the factors will give you a prediction for how metro should rank on some of these criteria. So what I'd be interested in, for instance, is what is the data tell us about how Cleveland should rank versus how Cleveland does rank or any of the other metros? and the model says they should. And can we figure out what it is that's going on in these places that's enabling them to score so much better than what we would like to, based on just these sort of tangible measures that we have? What are some of the things we're not measuring, maybe not picking up, that we can learn from looking at those places? And conversely, are we reaching that the model says we should be performing better than we are? And if not, why not? What are the places? So there are a lot of really interesting questions that remain to be pursued, and there's a lot of data, and I would urge you all to get, dig more deep into it, because there's a lot more that we can learn about all these issues.
Great, thanks, Mark. And I know we've got some more questions. We need to keep the agenda moving forward, so I want to thank our panel today for teeing off this conversation. If you want. I want to make a bit of a transition. There was a report that the fund sent out a while ago, some work done by the Regional Prosperity Project that looked at growth and opportunity and linking them in the essential nature. And they came out, they said that the problems of weak growth and widening income inequality and growing numbers of people in poverty are intertwined, and you got to deal with them together. It said that putting off efforts to expand opportunity and doing the economic development first doesn't work. That you've got to pursue it together, even though it's tough stuff, and that some of the best stuff is happening regionally because there's kind of a criticality of capacity. But they had a statement here that I guess I want to transition with. This said the biggest reason for the disconnect is that proponents of economic growth and proponents of expanding opportunity tend to reside in different camps and speak different languages. In fact, there is often a strict division of labor between the business and economic development organizations that focus mainly on economic growth and the philanthropic, labor, religious advocacy, and community-based organizations that focus mainly on expanding opportunity. There is nobody in charge of what we do with this. We've got groups that are working with it. The fund is obviously going to take this and try to define our strategy. Center for Community Solutions is working on similar stuff in the opportunity side. We've got Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium working in the public sector trying to make sense out of this stuff. We've got untold nonprofit organizations and local groups and foundations and people. But we've got to figure out, and we've got to take responsibility for putting this together. We had two very gracious offers of volunteering to do stuff. I would contend we need to take it a step further than that. We need to find those linkages ourselves. And in the words, or in the definition of Malcolm Gladwell, in the tipping point, we need to be connectors, mavens, and salespeople. Because if we wait for somebody else to do it, it ain't going to happen. Conversation, connection is critical, and I want to introduce Jill Miller-Ziman from the Civic Commons. I've had the fortune of being the board chair for the Civic Commons since its inception, and Jill's going to tell us how the Civic Commons is going to help us keep the conversation going. Jill.
Good morning. This is the second time that I've been able to hear the presentation, and I'm just overwhelmed with how smart it is, how much data is in there, but if you take the time to engage with it, it's not something that is so overwhelming that you can't understand it, but there is a lot of it, and it's fascinating to hear all the different questions. And what we do at the Civic Commons is a perfect place to be able to continue the conversation, do the discourse that we've heard people reference in terms of what do we do with this without anybody being in charge. Our world is increasingly participatory, and the online community is a big place where that happens. The Civic Commons has been around. We're in, I think, our 4th year now. And this is what the front page looks like for the landing page dedicated to what matters to metros. Basically, what you see here is some introductory information, some links that'll take you to the reports. On the side is the Twitter feed related to the work that the fund does. And up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see where you can register. And what we're encouraging everyone to do who's both attended these in person, but also has networks of people who you know should be knowing and engaging with this information and can help be part of the solution and the problem solvers directing what to do with all this,
is to engage them and invite them. I bet half this room has some kind of an email newsletter blast that goes out. That's a perfect opportunity to mention this report, mention where this conversation is going, and try and engage people to talk more about what they're finding and how it matters to them. It's very simple to register. You can do it through Facebook, or you can go here. The only things we ask for are your name and an email address. You will be faced with our principles related to engagement, and one of the things that we're known for is that you can attack issues, but you can't attack individuals. So we consider it a safe space to be able to do very tough critique, but one of our other principles is optimism, which means that it's okay to be critical, but we also want you to be constructive, because our goal is to try and come up with solutions. When you scroll down from that general background information, you'll see these four modules. Each one is a conversation. And for the What Matters to Cleveland, you would click on this one. You, of course, can and should review, take a look at what's developing on the other ones. And just today, some of the things that I heard that I think make fabulous conversations on the Civic Commons include someone talked about the cool factor and the talent retention. I think that deserves a lot more attention in terms of what is it, how do we get it, and is there a diminishing marginal return? Because one of the things that we know about Cleveland, I think in Northeast Ohio, is we talk a lot about our resilience and hard scrabble and certain virtues, certain ethics that come from all of that. So how can you go too far in trying to be cool? Well, is that going to turn off some people? The notion of perspective and how we look at things. I think the comments that Emily said about manufacturing, that we should be looking at that as an asset, not as a drag. But how many of us are guilty of looking at a lot of different elements related to this data as a drag instead of kind of turning them on its head and looking at them as assets? And then the last thing that I think really resonates, when gentlemen mentioned the state legislature and what is the connection between everything that's revealed in that report and what we're talking about here and the work that we do? Well, a budget is about to be signed for the next 2 years. How does that budget affect all these things that we now know and that we're learning, that we're going to explore more through this What Matters to Metro's report? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure that it's going to affect a lot of those things and will affect the policy choices that we want to make. So those are just 3 examples of the ways that you can, the things that you could explore in an online engagement forum. Again, I'd encourage you to please check it out for yourselves, but also it's intended to help engage people who couldn't be here or who are at maybe a slightly different level but still have something to contribute, people that we want to hear from. Buy-in is very important, and so any policy decision making that goes on at a certain level, we want there to be buy-in so that everybody feels supportive of it. So we feel that the Civic Commons is a great place for all of that kind of discourse to take place. So thank you very much.
When you get home and can't remember how to get to the Civic Commons conversation, it's on the back of this page, which is on your tables.
Right, and it is very simple. It's just theciviccommons.com/what matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. I think Jill did a phenomenal job of kind of summarizing the themes that we heard today. So thank you, Jill. And also encouraging us to continue the conversation. This was meant to be just a moment in time, an introduction. And we hope that what you heard today and read today and learned today will carry you forward into your work going forward. I think if we learn anything, it's the importance of the interconnectivity of all of our work. That it's going to take all of our sectors to make this real and to move our region forward. And so to send us on our way today, it is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Deb Hoover. Deb is the president and CEO of the Burton D. Morgan Foundation and also the chair of our fund for our economic future. Deb?
Well, all I
can say is, wow, what a great morning. I feel really, really energized to come away from here and go back to the work that I do every day, working for the fund and working for the Burton D. Morgan Foundation. So thank you all very much for being with us and for your engagement. I also want to thank Denise and Brian for leading the conversation and our esteemed panelists as well. We really appreciate your spending the time and sharing your perspectives with us. So we've had a lot of probing questions. I'm sure Emily feels like there have been a lot of really good questions. One thing that I want to pick up on is what Mark said at the end of our conversation. I think it'll be really important to take a look at those other metros and for us to get a better understanding of what they're doing right so that we can sort of pick and choose strategies that might work for our region. I think there's a lot more that we can learn from that particular part of the research. This is just the beginning of the heightened emphasis that the fund will take on the growth and opportunity agenda. This is really at the core of who we are and what we do, and it's going to be very, very important to us going forward. We're going to work really hard on this agenda in the coming months, but it is going to take the collective work of all of us to really make a meaningful difference there. This is the 10th year of our philanthropic collaborative, and so we'll be coming up on that big celebration. And I think we're really proud, and I think this has been a great celebration this morning of the significant progress that we have made, but we are not done. We are not done by a long shot. We really need to continue, and we need to continue to look at this research and other well-crafted research that we can use to help inform the important decisions and work that we undertake each and every day in our jobs. So I send us forward to go back to our work, to go back to our offices, and we will work hard to elevate this agenda in our work here in the region, locally, regionally, and nationally. So thank you all very much for being with us this morning. Discussion to be continued, and certainly the work to be continued. So thank you all.